the National Development Plan itself. And so by arranging sessions like these ones, we are opening up this conversation, we are getting expert advice and hoping to put public servants at ease by demonstrating that it is indeed possible to achieve alignment and articulation across these plans. And of course, given the work we are doing, Professor Maloke, the APRM, engaging with various countries across the continent, you are best placed to engage us on this because there's insight, there's experience that you have, those who have succeeded, you also know those who have struggled to achieve this type of alignment. It's an open conversation in a learning platform. There's no wrong and right answer. It's not didactic, but we are hoping that people will appreciate the perspective that we'll be sharing. Welcome to all of you once again. May you have a great hour and a half on this platform. Thank you, Program Director.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Principal. So we are involved in a tight conversation, no more than 2 hours, with Prof. Eddie Maloka, and we want to really create an opportunity for participants and guest speakers to interrogate the promotion of good governance and national planning for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest speaker. Prof. Eddie Maloka is the Chief Executive Officer of the African Peer Review Mechanism. It's an organ of the African Union responsible for promoting good governance in our continent, and is a visiting professor at the University of Witwatersrand School of Governance, Public Development Management in South Africa. He was the chairperson of the African Governance Architecture, AGA, a platform for dialogue among African institutions with a mandate to promote good governance and strengthen democracy in Africa, and formerly the president of the Convocation of the University of Cape Town. He is a widely published scholar with interest in African and international affairs. Prof, I'm not doing justice to the full profile, but I want to save time not only to hear you speaking, but also to allow our participants to engage with the content. Over to you, Prof. Eddie.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Louise. And also let me join you in really thanking the principal of the school, Professor Ncaweni, for inviting, for putting this together. And also for making it possible for us to have this conversation, and to say that I'm not speaking ill of, talking ill of your predecessors, but just to say that clearly you have, resolved the issue that existed between the transition between President Mbeki, President Mandela, and President Mbeki. When President Mbeki, they were saying, oh, these shoes are Mandela's shoes are too big. How are you going to fill them? And then he said, they are just too ugly. So in a sense, he created his own legacy. And I think that's what we see the principal doing, that he is being able to create his own legacy at the school. And we really commend you for this work. The school is very, very, very important. I'm quite familiar with it, but I think you've taken it to another level. So I'm very grateful for this invitation. I'm here with my colleague, who's our lead expert on the work that APRM we are doing on Agenda 2063 and the SDGs, and really to really thank the National School of Government and the team, of course, that is here, who have put together this class, and also to say how delighted we are to be part of this masterclass on NDP and good governance for the implementation of the SDGs and Agenda 2063, and also for allowing us to share with you some of our experiences with respect to these two agendas for sustainable development and Agenda 2063, of course, through our continent as part of the APRM mandate. Both agendas, we believe, are imperative for South Africa's National Development Plan and the government's mandate as it pertains to the South African Public Service and its obligations for service delivery. And we hope that in the course of this engagement, we'll be able to share with you our views regarding the work that we're doing around Agenda 2063, and how the APRM mandate relates to its implementation and evaluation. My colleagues, of course, Dr. Masiteng is here, and of course, my colleague Sarah Hamuda. I hope Sarah is working very hard to finish her PhD. I'm putting her under pressure so that also she already has an MS. It's already a title, I think, MS. So MS Hamuda will take you through further details on the implementation of the agenda and its implication for South African society. You know that the APRM, we were established by our president, and President Mbeki was actually quite a key figure, if not one of the leading figures. Myself, I was personally involved. We were assigned, we set up NEPAD, and then after NEPAD, we set up the African peer review mechanism, because at that time, a thinking had emerged among our leaders that you can't deal with the development questions in Africa without addressing the governance challenge. And the APRM was supposed to, and actually is supposed to, and that's what we are trying to do, to be a forum where leaders can engage openly and freely and give each other feedback about both strategic and technical issues pertaining to governance in Africa. And we are trying to do that. So it's a forum of the African Union where leaders meet as leaders. Below, there is a certain level that meets, and countries discuss frankly what the mechanism does, the work of the mechanism. We currently have 42 countries, and we have Guinea, Republic of Guinea is joining us this year, and Comoros. So the number will go to 44 at the next summit. And just to say that the way we do the work, we deploy, we do a lot of thematic work, but the core business is the review. So we send review teams to countries. So we deploy review teams to countries, and they get there, and they can stay, like now as in Comoros, and then my other colleagues are in Sierra Leone as I speak. So they can spend about 10 days, maybe even longer, depending on some countries that can be quite big. And they go with a team of experts led by lead panelists, because what the leaders have said to themselves, that we want frank and scientific assessments, but we can't review each other. So they then put together a panel of eminent persons. So currently our panel of eminent persons is comprised of 10 Africans, 2 from each of the 5 regions. And these 10 Africans, they discuss among themselves, and then they allocate countries to each other. And we as the Continental Office, then we support them. But countries that are participating in the APRM also establish national structures. So in South Africa, you do have a South African national structure. And I think some of our colleagues also will be here. And in Nigeria, we've got an APRM office. Senegal, we have APRM. So countries that are members are also required to establish national structures. So the APRM process is a participatory process. So ourselves here in the Continental Office, let's say South Africa is to undertake the review mission. South African national structures begin the preparatory processes, and then we then get involved as the Continental Office. We are working with the national structures. The lead panelists come, then we recruit consultants, we recruit experts, we invite African bodies, experts bodies to contribute to send their experts, and then we send a team to the field. So the team spends time there, then the team starts working on the report, and then of course with the participation of the country. But the process is owned and led by the country. So we are more like an external evaluation of some sort. And our recommendations tend to fall into 3 categories. And I want to emphasize this principle so that in future, maybe we could talk more about the APRM recommendations and how they are integrated into countries and so on. They fall into 3 categories. The first one you will find recommended. Let me start by saying that the APRM reports are like bubblegum music. They are almost similar because Africa's challenges are almost similar. It's youth unemployment, it's lack of infrastructure, a weak private sector, corruption, climate change. So you find the issues that you find in South Africa, you find in Mozambique, you find, so they are like bubblegum music. So it also makes it easier for countries to subject themselves to this process because they know that they are able to share their experiences to say, I'm also dealing with the issues of, let's say, climate change, and how are you dealing with it in your own country? But the recommendations, then our reports, they come up with the recommendations. And these recommendations, I think, will fall into 3 categories. One is you'll find recommendations that are desirable and required for the country, but are politically difficult. So it could be because of political divisions in a country. You find that something the country has to do or ought to do, but is unable to do because of political dynamics within that country. And you can think of many examples yourself. Then there will be a second category of recommendations that are also desirable and required for a country, but are difficult to do because of cultural or religious reasons. You may find some of them relating to issues around the girl child or around women. You find that in some countries it's difficult to make make marked progress or to push hard on the implementation of those recommendations, because within the country you find that there are already very strong cultural and religious barriers to the implementation of those recommendations. And then the third category of recommendations, there will be those that are structural. And one of them, of course, it's unemployment, it's poverty. You find that, and in the case of South Africa, of course, the legacy of apartheid, it's structural. And when you want to deal with the issues of the human settlement patterns in South Africa, of course, it's quite a structural. It's not something you're going to implement immediately. And so when you then look at these recommendations, you have to be able to say, this one is there, this one is there, this one. And then you may find that for each one of them, you need a different approach, a different strategy. And then what we normally recommend to countries, and this is what Sarah is going to talk about, is that these recommendations, we then work with countries to integrate into their national plans. So you will have APRM recommendations, then the launch of the report, and then we then talk about this domestication through national planning, through fiscal planning, and so on and so on. So that's the method that we're using and we've been using, and I'll maybe come back to some of that. And in terms of the work that we've been doing, which is relating to what we're discussing today, we've got a program that which is really aimed at supporting national governance, what you call national governance reporting, which includes developing monitoring specific indicators important for governance and service delivery. So we have developed a tool that then countries that help countries to do they don't have to wait for the continental office to come. They don't have to wait for the continental structures to come and write a report or do the evaluation. So countries can evaluate each other on continuous basis, and this tool is there, and we've made it available to countries. But it's not moving at the pace that we want. Not many countries. I think countries are still going for the traditional reviews. This one, they are not. So we want countries to internalize within their own national processes, their own reviews, working using the national structures. We ask the external, the continental office, we can provide them with the technical support. But we envisage a situation where in the medium to long term, each African country will be doing its own APRM reviews on continuous basis. Like Kenya has pioneered even a different one where the counties, which in South Africa will be the provinces or even the metros, they also use the APRM method to review themselves on continuous basis. And we also do some work, which is the work that Sarah leads, providing capacity building programs to member states on monitoring and evaluating of tools for Agenda 2063 and the SDGs. We'll talk about that. And we're also supporting them in alignment of national development plans with the SDGs and Agenda 2063. And of course, we're also working with the African governance architecture, which we are part of in the African Union. And we are producing biennial report, which is called the African Governance Report, which is a monitoring tool. When President Kagame did the reforms and led these whole reforms, one of the responsibilities that was given to APRM was for APRM to develop a governance monitoring tool for Africa. So that's how we came up with the African Governance Report. We have done 2 already. We're working on the 3rd one, which is going to the Assembly, and I'll come back to that later. And then we also have been able to integrate governance as into our own thinking and our own approach in how we deal with peace and security issues on the African continent. And one of the things that the role that is IPRM now has been recognized for in the peace and security doctrine of our continent is for APRM and the work of the APRM to serve as early warning. So the work that so that's why our reports now we present to the African Union Peace and Security Council, and we work as well with the entire African Union Peace and Security Architecture, and we're now going to have a joint retreat with the African Union Peace and Security Council in eThekwini in November. So and that's where we spend 2 days and looking at these issues. And then of course we also have a very ambitious outreach towards our youth and civil society and women. We've got a program that's targeting women. And then also the one for the youth, we actually have the APRM Youth Continental Youth Network. We do annually an APRM Youth Symposium. We've done 2 already. In fact, not 2 more, I think. We did one. The first one was in Chad. The latest was in Kampala. And we also have the initiatives around gender, and both for youth and gender. Our work is not in youth in general terms, but how do we integrate youth issues in the APRM methodology, in APRM processes, and how we ensure that the youth participate in APRM reviews, they participate actively, and their issues come out very strong. Like, for example, here in South Africa, we did some work with some entity, I think it's SIRE, actually it's them who actually initiated the work around the youth to say what are the youth issues that should be going into the APRM work. And we're doing that also on women and gender. We have a segment of our work that is looking at gender issues in the APRM methodology. So we have made a lot of progress, and I won't go into that. And my colleague Sarah will talk to some of these things. But just to say that some of the few observations that I can make as I draw towards concluding my presentation, it's really about the issues of constitutionalism and transformative leadership in Africa. We have made much progress. Myself, I don't subscribe to this view that we are regressing because of challenges of unconstitutional change of government, which are reoccurring in Africa. And Principal, I want to offer to come and present I don't know, there's a concept that I've been working on what I call the governance ecosystem. How, when you deal with governance, that you are actually looking at country level, even regional, but you are looking at 3 components. You are looking at the values, the commitments, and this will be articulated through culture, through a lot of other things, through aspirations of people. It could even be through regional instruments. It could be your own constitution. So this is the value component of the governance. And then you have the institutional and the legal. So these are your own institutions of the state and so on. But then you have a third component to this ecosystem of the governance ecosystem, which is what I call the warm body, the actual person. Because me and you, Principal, we worked in the same office, and I know you have worked also in that office for many years. You get to a point where you start thinking about leadership in abstract terms, but you think of leadership in concrete terms as actual people, as human beings. And these human beings, they are very strong, but sometimes they have their own challenges. And you find that the key for the ecosystem to work is for the 3 to work together, where you have the values and all, and you find the institution reflects these values, and then the individual has internalized and so on. So it's very, and then it could be a collective, the leadership, but essentially it boils down to individuals. And I've moved away from a thinking of leaders in abstract as a collective, some concept out there, but to think about leaders as actual people with ambitions, with weaknesses, with drinking problem, some with charm, some we don't have charm. And all those factors, they actually get to filter into how governance, how we make progress, how we make certain things. And it's something that I'm working on, and I'm offering myself, Principal, to say, I've been working on this issue of this ecosystem and how do you make it work? And then you find that then in these issues of unconstitutional change of government, the values are there. You find that maybe the institutions are there, but you find that the home body element There are contestations at there, personal animosity, personal clashes, a lot of other things. And then you find that then the system doesn't, the ecosystem is not well, and then there's unconstitutional. But you find that maybe even the institutions are not strong enough, that the institutions themselves are unable, that maybe the judiciary is not independent and certain things. So the institution is unable to secure and to protect the system from collapsing. So the ecosystem for me, it's something that I've been developing. But what has happened is that, so when you say unconstitutional change of government, it doesn't mean regression. It's a contestation at the difficulties of getting these three elements working together at country level in certain countries. There's nobody's questioning the values, nobody's said, even countries, I've been to countries that are suspended, nobody is questioning, nobody's protesting. The issues, the contestations, most of them are at the warm body level where there's a disagreement, there are grievances, and so on. You find that among our leaders, there's some misunderstanding, and then that misunderstanding articulates itself in that particular way where they take power and so on, but they accept the regional mechanisms when they come and intervene. So currently we are conducting reviews in a number of countries on unconstitutional change of government. We have just completed Sierra Leone. We are completing Sierra Leone. We are doing Comoros. Lesotho is complete. We are sending a team to Guinea, and then we are also still working on other countries. So we're going to put this into Africa Governance Report, and we're taking it to the Assembly because we're conducting the diagnostics in countries to say what are the issues. So I think these are some of the issues. I would have gone more into the peace development governance in the nexus, but I've touched a little bit on that. Sarah will talk on the SDGs more and how we galvanize at the continental level. I just want to close by simply saying, what are the lessons learned? Because Agenda 2063 is not the first program of Africa. The first program for development of Africa was the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980. Then afterwards, we had the Abuja Treaty, which became, I think, 1992. And then we had NEPAD. And then now we have Agenda 2063. Lagos Plan of Action and the Abuja Treaty, they were related. One was the elaboration of the other, and they were mainly aimed at establishing or using the European model of integration, working towards the establishment of an African Economic Community. And it's out of the Abuja Treaty that the leaders said, but why do we have to wait for? It was in stages. Stage one, you do this custom union, stage two. But the leader said, but why do we have to wait? Let's do the African Union now. So the African Union was supposed to be something to happen in towards the last stage. So that's why they set up the African Union. They adopted the Constitutive Act. But when we did that, we also had NEPAD. So NEPAD was a different program. NEPAD was supposed to galvanize international support for Africa's development with injection of resources and so on and so on. And there were some projects in a particular, and it was grounded on this thinking that the governance, development, the nexus, governance, development, and peace and security, that we need to put that together. African leaders have to take response and so on. And of course, NEPAD did a lot. So Agenda 2063 is different. It's more like a long-term planning approach. So we say, where do we want Africa to be in 2063, in 50 years when they did this thing? So we said, this is where we want Africa to be. So we identified all these aspirations. And then we then said, here are the aspirations. Then we came up with a 10-year implementation plan for each of the aspirations. Then we then said, we need catalyzers, drivers. That's how they came up with the flagship projects. So they identified all these flagship projects so there's been a progress in thinking in how Africa should develop from the stages. And you could say that of the Lagos Plan, Abuja Treaty, now to the catalyzers and the aspirations of Agenda 2063. One key thing is that you need a strong governance ecosystem to support this, because Sarah will talk about political will, because political will is key, is a warm body element to this. But for me, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, when you go to the high-level political forum in New York and listen to the difference, you listen to reports from other countries and African countries, what is missing in the African case is self-reliance, self-funding. Until we are able to mobilize our own resources, fund our own projects, fund our own national development plans, we'll always have this own challenge. And this is Africa's biggest challenge, that we don't seem to have a solution to. Even these flagship projects are predicated, quite a number of them, on the resources coming from outside. We should learn from NEPAD that these resources are not in abundance. They are there, but most of them you find in speeches and declarations and pledges. but in actual effect, they don't exist physically. So, and now with what's happening in Ukraine and all these things, so Africa really now we need to move to a point where we start looking concretely at the issue of self-reliance and how to make sure that we fund these projects, we implement this project at country level from our own resources, but also the continental level. But at country level, it starts with funding our own budgets. South Africa, I know that from the beginning, you ensure that you fund your own budgets, but that's not the case for majority of African countries. You find that their dependency on external funding for budgets, for their own national budget, is quite huge. So it's a big challenge, and it's something that I think it's a big issue that we need to address. And it was not there in Abuja Treaty, it was not there in the Lagos Plan, it was not there in NEPAD, and also it's still a missing issue. Even when you look at the 10-year implementation of Agenda 2063, it was a missing link. And now we're working on the next 10-year implementation. And I think that issue is not being adequately addressed. So I apologize if I spoke too long. And I do thank you, my sister Lepan, and Principal, thank you very much for the floor. My dear sister is Sarah, and I told you that the title MS is still a very strong title. I thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Prof. Eddie, for that lovely overview of the African peer review mechanism. I just want to highlight that our guests, our participants in the session include Directors General, Heads of Department, Chief Executive Officers, and then we have a very large contingent of academics, Prof. Eddie, and researchers as well. So I'm inviting everybody to participate in the session using the Q&A. Before you go, Prof. Eddie, I'm going to read those one point made by Salim Latif. He says the SDGs, as with the African peer review mechanism, national action plans adds a further layer of compliance complexity to national level engagements and simply serves to further overwhelm national officials. At best, countries may use these, the SDGs and the NACP, to mobilize funds, as you said earlier, while they continue to exercise development planning autonomy. You are better off focusing on enhancing national capacity to do better and avoid new layers of reporting, that is monitoring and evaluation. So this is a comment and perhaps a point if you want to respond, and then we will hand over to Sarah in a minute. Prof, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. That's why we've always been arguing that the location of these plans, governments should think quite a bit hard about the location of these plans, so that if you locate them in different departments or locations of government within the government, then you're going to have that multiple reporting, sometimes even competing. But if you have one focal point, like in the case of the APRM, for example, and I don't have anything in mind that I want to say, but you find that in quite a number of countries, you find two trends. One is foreign, they put it in the foreign ministry, and then but the trend that even in my view works better is the one when it's in the Ministry of Planning. And I remember when I went to I once received a presentation from our very able colleagues in the Ministry of National Planning in South Africa. That they were, I remember it was during the time of Director General Sidiso Matona, when they were showing to me that the sources for South African national development planning and the follow-ups and all these programs that have been done by governments that go into national governance, the reporting by government, they had their sources, the NDP, they had their sources, the National Development Plan, of course, Agenda 2063, and SDGs. And the NEPAD APRM was missing. And I said, but APRM, we have done these reports and the recommendations, but they are sitting in a different government department. So when you have that, then you have multiple reporting and competing processes and so on. And then sometimes you find that we do a lot of good work as the APRM, but the reports don't filter into your own planning, don't filter into your own implementation, because so these are the things that countries have to take into account. And it's a debate that we always encourage countries to engage, to say where you locate these M&E bodies or these M&E tools. It's important. Better locate them in one focal point, or at one focal point, and to enable the focal point to be able to coordinate, to be able to, and for them, even for, there must be, what do you call it, dialogue and conversation, cross-pollination, that's the word I wanted, among them, so that the other can enrich and they can be able to say, no, but this one and this one. And it's an issue of coordination at country level. But we encourage countries to really think hard about where they locate these kind of mechanisms at country level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that overview. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our next speaker. This is Sarah Hamuda. She has 11 years of professional experience in the international cooperation and development field. Currently, she works for the African Union Secretariat for the APRM mechanism as an officer in charge of the Agenda 2063 SDG unit and South-South cooperation. She's based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Earlier, she worked for the Cabinet of the Minister of International Cooperation in Egypt as a senior economic researcher in charge of cooperation with Arab and regional funding institutions and China, as well as the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg. Ms. Hamuda contributes to various publications pertinent to governance, SDGs, Agenda 2063, and progress in Africa. So, colleagues, please engage with our panelists, use the Q&A function. And Sarah, if you would also just pick up one of those questions that we have in the session. Over to you, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm trying just to share the presentation from my side. Is it visible to you, Louis?
Oui, madame. If you can put it into full screen mode.
Okay. Let me try to do that. Just a second.
Almost. You're...
Yeah, I'm just trying to... Okay, let me start because I think I can't turn it to the full mode. Can you hear me, Louis?
Yes, we can hear you. Just click at the bottom to full screen.
Yes, I'm trying, but I'm not able to do that. I don't know why from that moment. So maybe I should proceed, or maybe I'm trying to refresh the.
It's fine. Continue.
Yeah, let me please try once again. Maybe that's better. No, thank you very much, Louis, and thank you for all participants. Let me start by saying that, of course, thank you, Professor Maloka, for supporting this important masterclass. It's a joint activity. We are very keen and very happy to always share with the public civil servants the progress towards Agenda 2063 and also to raise awareness and advocacy on the agenda. It's one of our flagship, I would say, continental programs, which we are very keen to include and also publicize it, if I can say it correctly, amongst all African public service servants. My focus, I think Professor Maloka already highlighted enough what the African peer review mechanism is doing. And for me, I will be more focused on our expanded mandate and how we are supporting the monitoring and the evaluation of Agenda 2063 and SDGs without definitely duplicating the efforts of member states, because the rationale itself is to move to follow this bottom-up approach from national to regional to continental level for integration. So definitely the methodology and the rationale of Agenda 2063 itself does not recommend duplicating efforts amongst the African Union and also the member states. Then I'm also moving into further, I would say, detailed presentation on the progress towards the agenda. What are the indicators and how we translated the goals and aspirations into specific indicators. And of course, I will use here aspiration 3 and 4, which focus mainly on promoting good governance in Africa and also promoting peace and security, because both aspirations are our main focus and also strongly related to our mandate. So of course, Prof. Malouka already spoke about that. I don't have to go through these slides again. This is just for your background. But of course, as he said, we were born as part of AUDANIPAD, and then we become as a fully integrated body of the African Union in 2017. APRM was designated to a mandate to play a role in the promoting, of course, good governance, but also assisting African countries in the monitoring and evaluation of both agendas. Maybe also Prof refers to how we are structured at continental level. Some people think that we are based in Ethiopia. Some people think we are based at national level. Actually, we are very much inclusive, I would say, body compared to other AU organs, because we have representation at national level. We have national secretariats, we have national governance councils, and also we have a liaison officer to the African Union, Addis Ababa, and our base continental secretariat is based in Johannesburg, where I'm talking to you today. We also gather at the APR forum. The heads of states are gathering, as Prof. Malouka alluded, to discuss the peer-reviewed countries and to launch the reviews that are usually organized by and also prepared by the APRM Continental Secretariat and a bunch of continental experts from across the continent. Maybe I need to also let you know just that we are focusing on 5 thematic areas of governance: democracy and political governance, economic governance, socioeconomic governance, and this is where many broad issues are addressed, like poverty, like national development planning, environment, decision-making, participation and decision-making, and also women empowerment in economy. We also have corporate governance, which is becoming very strategic now, especially with the growing role of public-private partnership, the private sector engagement in SDGs, and also the role of corporate governance in strengthening the African financial system. And lastly but not least, and we added this area very recently, is the resilience and state disaster. And we added this thematic area in response to member states' recommendations within the COVID-19 times, how countries and institutions are well prepared and responsive to disasters and shocks. And we realized that we need to strengthen our country's capacities in these areas. And actually, beside what Prof. Malouka mentioned as the major or the overview, the governance review that covers all these areas, we developed a very innovative type of reviews called targeted reviews. When countries request a specific analysis or assessment of a specific topic or sector, like health, education, gender equality, or youth, and we develop this kind of target review, it's more cost-effective oriented and precise on certain sectors. We have done this with Kenya, with Sierra Leone recently on the health resilience in the time of COVID-19. We did it also with Zambia to focus on youth, and also we did it with Djibouti to focus on the fiscal decentralization. So this is just to show you how we function, and this is how also our review process is conducted. It's important to say that we are trying as much as we can to keep our governance assessment reviews technically competent, credible, and definitely free of political manipulation. I was very happy and proud to be part of the South African review, the second generation last year, and we have seen how far even the second review has changed as way of method compared to the first review, especially with the inclusion of different stakeholders from different municipalities in Durban, in Cape Town, and Freetown. We almost visited 8 municipalities in South Africa in order to do the fair assessment of the governance progress on the country. The expanded mandate, and this is where SDGs and Agenda 2063 highly matter. The expanded mandate offered the EPRM a broad, I would say, spectrum of engagement with Agenda 2063. We have been asked by the African Union and member states to play a role in monitoring and evaluation both agendas at continental level and providing the national capacity to our member states. We were also asked to enhance our methodology and methods to conduct the review, and also to ensure the integration of EPRM recommendations into National Plan of Actions and the National Development Planning of countries. beside also the fact that we were taking the lead to assess the governance mechanisms for the implementation of SDGs and Agenda 2063 at national level. And I'm glad to say that probably EPRM today is the only AU body which has for over 3 years a consistent platform for SDGs and Agenda 2063 consultations, and I'm coming to this later to show you. And we also developed specific questionnaire to assess the governance mechanisms for the implementation of SDGs and Agenda 2063 in the continent. Prof already alluded to Agenda 2063 and the aspirations. And as you can see, we have 7 aspirations, we have 20 goals, and we have developed something we call the Agenda 2063 Continental Framework for Reporting on Agenda 2063. This framework was only adopted in 2019, and I think this is one of the reasons why reporting on the agenda at continental level was delayed. However, I have to say that the framework includes or covers more than 66 indicators. The reason why we developed this framework is because also countries expressed their reporting fatigue they have when they report also on SDGs. And in order to make sure that we are not overburdening them with another reporting layer, we as EPRM, led by the African Commission, AUDA-NEPAD, and other organizations like the African Development Bank, we developed something called Agenda 2063 Technical Working Group. So this technical working group has been gathering since 2016 or 17. Maybe I joined the Secretariat in 2018, but these meetings were already ongoing, and they developed a framework to publicize it to African countries with a specific tool so they can fulfill the information. And then from the member states' submissions, we are actually develop the continental reporting and the continental findings of Agenda 2063 implementation. We have also flagship projects, as CEO referred, and we are mainly focusing as EPRM on certain issues like the African Continental Free Trade Area, the free movement of persons also and on the continent, and how this affects the issue of migration in Africa. The continental financial institutions, definitely silencing the guns is one of our priorities, especially with the growing impact, as the CEO alluded, between governance, peace, security, and development on the continent. And lastly but not least, definitely the Pan-African University and all the work we do with research institutes in Africa. As you can see, SDGs are much broader, have different goals, have more goals, many targets, and definitely more than 232 indicators. That's why it's impossible for any country to fulfill all the goals at the same time and with the same resources, because it will be a very difficult exercise to fulfill. What I want to say, and important to emphasize, that Africa has been extremely strategic in developing the SDGs, and the Agenda 2063 itself has been quite critical because the agenda was developed in 2013, 2 years before the adoption of the 2015 Sustainable Development Agenda, or the SDGs. And Africa is probably a very lucky continent because we developed what is called the post-2015 Common Africa Position, where we focused on governance. And Africa, this was an official submission from African countries to the United Nations about Africa position from sustainable development. And therefore, you can see that most of SDGs have also relevance to Agenda 2063, issues about poverty, issues about health, issues about education. But of course, Agenda 2063 is more tailor-made for our continent, and it's more tailor-made to respond to the challenges we have, because we have issues of conflict, we have issues of financial fragility, we have issues of people displacement. So of course, the continental agenda matters for our needs. As you can see also here, this is the very famous chart we share with most of students, experts at national level, executive offices, when they ask about the relevance between all the agendas. And you can see there's almost 80% or 89% relevance between Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063. But there are also some goals that, as I said, matter to us, like the peace and security architecture, the financial institutions in Africa, that may not necessarily be reflected in a global agenda. But what is also very close to us is the high five strategy developed by the African Development Bank. And this was a very responsive action from the bank to align its policies and strategy with Agenda 2063 to make sure that the money deployed to countries are feeding into the Agenda 2063 implementation at continental level. And as you can see here, this is SDG 16, which refers to peace, justice, and stronger institutions. And this is actually one of our very focused goals, and how it relates to the goals in Agenda 2063. I think Prof. Maloka referred to all of those goals: peace and security, gender equality, youth, and you can see governance is a cross-cutting topic and cross-cutting goal between all these goals. I would say, just to give you a snapshot on what we do at EPRM, we also have a specific focus on specific indicators of SDG 16, like issues related to rule of law and access to justice on the continent, reducing corruption or fighting corruption, effective, accountable and transparent institutions. We are working very well with the United Nations on the raising awareness and evaluation of what we call principles for effective governance of SDGs, developed by the Committee of Experts of Public Administration at the United Nations. It's called CEPA. And we also work on inclusive and participatory decision-making through the engagement of youth and women, and broadening Africa's participation in the institutions of global governance. We have been trying, as Prof. Maloka says, to establish institutionalized connection and coordination with the United Nations, UNICTAD, UNICA, and many other organizations to promote Agenda 2063. And lastly, but not least, also enhancing inclusiveness and fighting discriminatory, I would say, practices. So this is our mandate in a nutshell. You can see we have different interventions in different areas, and I can say at least from the Agenda 2063 SDGs also supporting component, we are becoming a continental mechanism for the VNR, VLR's activity. The VNR refers to the voluntary national reporting, when SDGs countries are encouraged every year to submit a report on how far they are with the SDGs implementation at national level. And of course, respecting the national priorities, we have created a platform. It's called the EPRM platform for VNRs, to enhance the peer learning between African countries on how far they are planning for the SDGs, how far they are including SDGs into national development plans, the financing resources, financing development, the M&E tools available at national and continental level, what are the possibility of supporting them when they are writing the report itself, and so on and so forth. And as I said, we also support the UN African Union framework for the implementation of the agenda, especially on Cluster 9 on governance. We are also having, and we established since 2017, the National Development Planning Community of Practice, which serves as, once again, a platform for African ministers and expertise to join us and to share with each other the national development plans issues and how they can help each other also in a peer learning exercise to improve alignment with of NDP with both agendas. One of the very special activities we have done last year is a new report on national disaster management and national development planning, and we were very happy to collaborate with DPSA and National Planning Commission of South Africa to have a submission on how far the country responded to COVID-19 crisis, and we are expecting to launch this report very soon. This year, the National Development Plan, our community of practice, will be more focused on the issues of peace and security and how we can integrate early warning indicators against conflict in the National Development Plan to assist countries in transition, especially those who went through coup d'etat recently in Africa and have critical issues to proceed. I would say that the last point also, as I said, focus on early warning for conflict prevention, and we have a special team here working on these issues to make sure that our governance reviews are fully aligned with the peace and security issues we have in the continent. From a more technical perspective, you can see here, we provide national capacity building on different areas, including the M&E training we have, the VNR, VLR reporting. And I want to say that beside the continental workshops we organize on VNRs and domestication of Agenda 2063, we also assist the countries when they report on these goals at the high-level political forum in New York. So we always organize with the African Union mission to the United Nations a special side event every year to bring African countries together. And this is probably one of the few times where high-level, senior-level experts, they meet and try to exchange views on how far they are with the implementation of these goals, the submissions, the priorities, how the African Union should support more, and so on and so forth. Another also area of training led by another colleague is the National Plan of Action, how the recommendations emanated from EPRM reviews can be incorporated into the national development plans. And I think we had a very good exercise with South Africa because the National Development Planning and Dr. Kifilo, the National Planning Commission, were also part of our stakeholders during the preparations of the review. Prof. Maloka spoke about the ecosystem so ecosystem for SDGs and Agenda 2063 domestication, which definitely requires the role of the strategic planning. So as you can see, we are supporting countries in these thematic areas of ownership and leadership and community. And that's why we always have civil society, youth, female, gender, I would say, female representatives in our workshops and capacity building at continental level. We are working on raising the political will and actionable intervention, especially at the presidency and prime minister offices. We also try to focus on issue of stakeholder engagement, how far the public-private partnership is supporting the SDGs. And I'm here just sharing with you the ecosystem we have learned over the last 3 years for the SDGs and Agenda 2063 domestication, which requires a strong institutional and coordination mechanisms at the highest level of the government, the integration of SDGs into NDP, the role of stakeholders like media, private sector, academia, youth, the role of also non-state actors in promoting the agenda. And of course, we cannot forget the role of statistics. And I think South Africa also is a role model with the Stat Africa, providing a lot of reliable, updated data on how far they are at the level of poverty, at the level of education, and so on and so forth. And then lastly but not least, we refer to the M&E mechanisms put in place, like the VNR or other, I would say, reporting that the country adopts to improve the SDGs implementation. And lastly but not least, also to make sure that this reporting is systematic, consistent, and not just a one-time exercise. Once again, this is the work we do in a more organized way. And as I said, we are not only focusing on SDG 16, but also we focus on other areas. And I'm happy to say that we have started recently working with the Oxford University to promote development, a different tool in assessing poverty from multidimensional perspective. And we are trying to make South Africa our pilot project and one of the first beneficiaries from this tool, because the National Planning Commission has been very supportive to that. But also we work a lot on activities of SDG 5 on gender equality and also partnerships and health resilience. This is just some pictures from our workshops over the last 3 years. On the left, our workshop in Rwanda, on the right, our workshop in Abuja this year, which included roughly 70 experts from across the continent and the 35 SDGs focal points in Nigeria in different federal states. So we, as I said, we offer this platform to share experiences, and with South Africa in particular, we have been sharing also the good practice from South Africa to track the implementation of SDGs. And I think the SDG tracker they develop is one of the best practices in this regard. This is what we do at the capacity building level, but also we have another area of intervention to produce knowledge products with value add on the governance mechanisms for the implementation of SDGs. And you can get access to this report from our website. You can see how far countries are implementing national development plans, how they integrated into integrate the SDGs and Agenda 2063 into the NDP, how far we have best practice from some countries, how far we have challenges, and also to the extent of which countries were able to establish the constitutional and the legislative arrangements to ensure the engagement of all branches of the government into the SDGs implementation. You can see here we are also tracking progress on gender parity, degree of integration into National Development Plan. And a third area of engagement, I would say, is the advocacy and assessment of CEPA principles in Africa. And I said that these principles were endorsed by the ECOSOC, the United Nations Socioeconomic Council, and adopted by CEPA, which is led by Madame Geraldine Molokiti, the former DPSA minister and currently the chair lady of the Committee of Experts of Public Administration at the United Nations. So all these principles, 11 principles, are strongly linked to the public service delivery. And we were also honored to work on a tool which has been already publicized in 2020 to assess how far countries are aware of these principles and how far they are implementing it at national level. And unfortunately, the results show that there is a huge disparity of understanding and knowledge of basic principles of effective governance of SDGs on the continental level. Also, countries emphasize that they need more capacity training on issues of sound policy making and how government can collaborate together at time of crises. And mostly importantly, also the principle of inclusiveness and its associated principles need further capacity building at national level as well, because countries don't adopt sufficient strategies to ensure inclusiveness and participation, especially when it comes to gender-sensitive budgeting, for instance, or the multi-level governance. I'm coming to the second part of my presentation. I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but this is just to show you also when we ask it member states under CEPA questionnaire, how far they think or they believe that COVID affected the implementation of some strategies of CEPA. And of course, some of the strategic strategies which have been alluded are issues of investment in e-government, issues of promoting anti-corruption, strengthening municipal finance and local governance, also the issues related to community-driven development, and of course, proactive disclosure of information. Another important thing to also highlight that we do is the positioning of ACADEC, the African Charter of Democracy and Governance in Africa. It was adopted already since 2007, and countries are trying to work on that to ensure that the implementation of democratic rules and also good governance are endorsed by many African countries. As you can see, Aspiration 3 has specific indicators, specific also targets, and we are working with the African countries to report on these goals. We send a query led by the African Commission to submit, I would say, submission on these goals every 2 years, so we can have the continental report on Agenda 2063. Of course, that's not everything, but what I want to say that we also got challenges from African countries to provide statistics on the issue of public service delivery and also how far they are less corrupt, and also the issue related to the payment of bribes, for instance, and also the access to information. This is just to show you in a nutshell all the platforms we have been using in order to also publicize Agenda 2063 and SDGs. And I think Prof already referred to the Youth Symposium, the work we do with non-state actors, and also the South-South Cooperation Forum we have every year beside other activities. This is just for your knowledge on the gender activities we do in Agenda 26 in EPRM, because we noticed from our EPR reviews that also gender-based violence is quite prominent in the continent, and we have to do something for it. And we are trying to also now raise awareness on these issues. Moving to the second part on the continental progress of Agenda 2063. This is the results of the second second continental report developed by the African Commission last year. I was part of the technical working group working on this report, and I want to say that to avoid, once again, the duplication of efforts, African countries submitted to us national reports on progress towards Agenda 2063 beside the statistical tool we are using. And as you can see, we still have some challenges to promote good governance on the continent. Lack of data is one of the clear issues, and this is where EPRM role should be emphasized and should be even promoted, because there is a lot to grasp and to learn from the EPRM reviews over the last 4 years. And also we have critical issues with poverty alleviation and also inclusive growth on the continent. You can have access to the full report from the link. I shared it with you. And it's important to know that this is, as I said, it's a 2-year progress report. It's based on in-country planning, monitoring, and reporting processes. And we always invite African countries for a validation meeting to make sure that the process is inclusive. I'm happy to say that now we are conducting the first evaluation for the first 10-year implementation plan, and we are going through very broad approach in that process, where we are also conducting country reviews. We are deploying our statistical tools, but also we are trying to engage civil society in the process. And I think the new CEO of AUDA-NEPAD, in alignment with Prof. Maloka, are trying to lead many continental efforts on this in this regard. These are the goals which are reflected by our aspirations. And as you can see, goal 12, which is part of aspiration 3, have a serious issue because the lack of data. Maybe the indicators here should be improved, but member states usually don't respond on the question regarding how far public institutions are empowered enough to enhance public service delivery. And you can see that there is some, I would say, similarities and also differences between the regions on the implementation of Agenda 2063, but they're also trying as far as much as they can to implement most of the agenda goals. It's also worth highlighting that in our reporting in 2021 on the overall, we ensured that the continental response to COVID-19 pandemic is also highlighted, how far the African Union supported the continent and how far certain countries like South Africa, especially with the chairmanship of South Africa to the Union in 2020, has been quite instrumental to also include and create different responses to COVID-19 at continental level. Lastly, but not least, I am sharing with you how far we are as African countries which are submitting reports on national reports on SDGs. We have developed a new report. It's, I would say, compilation of different work we have been doing over the last 2 years. And this reflects the African voices on how they implement, domesticate, monitor, and evaluate Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030. And it's like a peer learning, I would say, knowledge product for African countries. And we can see from 2020 up till 2022 that the number of African countries is increasing when it comes to reporting on the SDGs, and they are trying also to report on Agenda 2063 on the same time for the sake of avoiding different layers of reporting. This is just some of our surveys. I would be very happy if you have time to at least report on the state of implementation of Sustainable Development Goals in South Africa. This is our upcoming report on the governance mechanisms for the implementation of SDGs in Africa. And we have also another survey on SIPA principles, so we can also update our data. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with you some insights from the continent, what we do, how far we are, and over. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hamuda, for the detailed presentation. I just want to share with our colleagues in the call today that we will make available the recording as well as the slide presentations for your further use. Ms. Sarah, before you go away, Mafole Makalobe has asked 3 questions related to security, if I could just raise it with you. One is around the issue of the pandemics and climate change, redefining national security in many African countries and finding expression in the AU Agenda 2063. So you did mention the issue of the pandemic as well as some issue about climate change. The next question from the same person says, is there greater movement towards the democratic transformation or governance of the security sector in the African continent, particularly the military and the intelligence services? And then on the same theme, from the same colleague Mafole Makolobe, what are collective African peace building or track 2 initiatives, mechanisms, approaches to deal with the challenges and consequences of terrorism in the continent? What is the success rate of these initiatives? If you can just take them as one theme, please, Sarah. Thank you. I think you unmute. Can you unmute?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm looking at the questions now, starting from how are the phenomena such as pandemic and climate change redefining national security in many African countries and finding expression in the EU Agenda 2063? I think this is the first question, if I'm not mistaken, Louis. Well, yes, definitely. Well, definitely it's been taken very well into consideration, because if you notice, also Africa is one of the most fragile continents when it comes to climate change. And what we are trying to do also now is to support African countries ahead from COP27 to have Africa common position from climate change issues and challenges. The African Commission also is leading many activities in alignment with the African Development Bank on these issues. And also we have a specific directorate for also agriculture in the Union to handle different issues related to climate change versus agriculture on Africa. When it comes to national security, I think definitely the COVID to some extent imposed different nationalistic, I would say very traditional nationalistic approach. As we studied in political science, countries become more protective when it comes to imposing lockdown, imposing different restrictive measures. Having said that, we also noticed that some countries like South Africa, with the development of different statistical tools to raise awareness on the about the pandemic, countries like Senegal, Rwanda, they have been also trying to change the narrative by developing homegrown solution to the COVID crisis, and also the re-innovation about the delivery of vaccination to some vulnerable groups, if I may say. I think once again, it's the governance ecosystem and how countries were able to adjust to the pandemic without necessarily applying this strict nationalistic approach while dealing with the crisis. I think one of the very good practices we had at the union level is the creation of the Solidarity Fund, where countries were asked to donate in order to provide vaccination to the least developing countries, or also some developing countries in Africa, and also the role led by the Commission to coordinate with the European Union and also Asian partners to make sure the delivery of vaccination as much as they can. The following question about is there greater movement towards democratic transformation of the security sector in Africa continent, particularly the military and intelligence services? I would say this is quite a critical issue. We have been discussing this under our political governance and democratic values, I would say, thematic area. EPRM remains a voluntary mechanism. We provide recommendations when necessary, but of course, but definitely most of African countries and even African leaders are aware of the challenges we have, and that's why we developed transformative leadership as a thematic area of the first Africa governance report developed in 2019 to highlight how far it's important for all the stakeholders, national stakeholders at the government level, including the military, should also consider the democratic values and the voice of people while taking decisions. Following Mr. Mukalobi, I think he has another question, or what are the collective African peace building or track 2 initiatives, mechanisms, approaches to deal with the challenges and consequences of terrorism in the continent? I'm not the best expert to respond on that, but what I can say precisely is that we currently with the EU transformation, the African Commission, the AGA Secretariat, now it becomes, I would say, a one team. Peace and security governance becomes one directorate, and this at least shows that the African Commission is aware that governance and development cannot be functioning without peace in the continent. But we have also the EU Peace Architecture, and this is where we are trying to include all the African Union organizations, all member states together in order to discuss peace and security pressures on the continent. We have what we call a post-conflict and development center, which is now established in Cairo to provide capacity building and national capacity building in a post-conflict community, in post-conflict communities, and to assist the public civil servants and even the government officials in any country like Chad, Mali, South Sudan, even Sudan now, especially after the political transition. So for the peacekeeping forces to be prepared and also the civil servants to be prepared. I think there is also different forums. We have like Tanta Forum, where they are also discussing peace and security issues. And all these recommendations are also by in a way or another are translated to the Executive Council of the African Ministers and the heads of states the heads of state level at the AU summit. So I see also another question, Saline, if you allow me. Someone has asked, Saline Latib, asking about to what extent EPRM is EPRM an instrument for Africa ownership? Seems like EPRM is doing the work of UN agencies and not sufficiently focused on engaging on African realities and articulating African perspectives in the face of the demand arising from the global north. Well, I think this is a very good question and a provocative question. As EPRM, we have, and as I said, that's why we are believing very much in the African, we are by origin and by foundation, we are an African Union organization. And the reason why we are in a full alignment and collaboration with the UN agencies, because those agencies also approach EPRM and request support from EPRM to implement the Sustainable Development Goals at national levels. And this has to be done in full alignment with Agenda 2063. So what we do is that we are also imposing our agenda while taking care of the global development agenda, because Africa is not living in an isolated, I would say, island. We're also interacting with different partners, different donors, different development partners on the continent. They are already in collaboration with our member states. So either whether we accept it or not, we really need to also have this collaborative manner with the UN agencies. So it's not about that we are doing the work. They have offices here and they are functioning from Africa, but we are actually trying to make sure that Agenda 2063 is incorporated in the work of these agencies. And when they are talking about sustainable development goals, they are not forgetting that we have a continental agenda that we are all working on. So let me stop here. If there's any other question, I'm available to answer, definitely, Louis, but I need to give more time to Dr. Kifilo. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Hamuda. Ladies and gentlemen, you can see the way that the agenda of the masterclass is moving. We've gone from the global perspective to the continental perspective, and now we want to look at the national and domestic perspective. And so I would like to call Dr. Kafilwe Masiteng closer. She is the acting secretary of the National Planning Commission in the presidency. She holds a PhD from Wits University and wrote a book from a thesis titled The Determinants of Poverty and Inequality in South Africa since 1994. She holds a master's in public health from University of Pretoria, specializing in monitoring and evaluation. She was the Deputy Director General for Statistics South Africa for 11 years, responsible for censuses and household surveys. And she was responsible for population and social statistics, including poverty, employment, population statistics, demography, health, and vital statistics, as well as monitoring and evaluation. Her passion is youth development, and she's also going to respond to some of the questions raised in the chat box. Dr. Kafilwe, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you very much, Louise. Let me see if I can just do... The presentation from our side is just talking about the work that we have been doing internally. I seem to be struggling to... Let me reshare, I don't know what happened. It's just to talk about the work that we have been doing in South Africa as a country. I think it has also come at the time where we really have to present after what has been presented from APRM. I am not sure why we cannot move the slides, why we cannot move into. Okay.
Philo?
Hello?
Yes, I may advise that you close the presentation and open it again. I did that and it worked in the second time.
Yeah, I tried already. I will reshare now. I do not understand why it doesn't. Okay. Okay, it is not. Louise, are you able to share? Maybe it is not
Okay.
able to do it. I will unshare again. I will entirely depend on you. But maybe I should just start in the meantime.
Continue. Yes.
Yes, the presentation that we have today is about what we do and how we have done the work over the past years to ensure that there is alignment, there is work that is done between the national planning, there is work that is done with the global critical issues. One who just made an introduction that as we sit today, we see 2022 mark a very critical time in the national planning landscape of our country globally as well as in the continent. The critical issues that one can raise is that as we look at the work that has been done to date, what we have is that we are 10 years into the implementation of the National Development Plan in South Africa. The NDP in South Africa was launched in 2012. So we are at a very opportune time to take stock, to try and find a way of making sure that everybody in South Africa is part of the understanding of the National Development Plan as the plan of the country, not the plan of government alone. And having said that, we are also at an opportune time that we are participating in the evaluation of the first 10 years of implementation of Agenda 2063. In the country, again, we are also at a point where we are looking at midterm review of the current 5-year plan of the country, which we call the MTSF as an implementing framework for the National Development Plan. So the time is so opportune for all of us to be able to start taking cognizance of how far we are. And I was even looking at it and saying, at this point, we are also at the last 10 years of implementation of the NDP, as well as the last decade of implementation of SDGs. So what an opportune time to say, how far have we come? Where have we not gone well? What has hampered the ability to implement national plans, continental plans, and aspirations? How and why have we not been able to attain some of the objectives, targets, goals, aspirations, even at the level of Vision 2030? But one of the things that I always raise is that the adoption of the SDGs in 2015 provided a commitment by leaders to take a concrete step in dealing with critical issues of development in the sector's economy, social transformation. And one of the critical issues that arose when 2015 came was we were not so strong on environmental issues, but when it came in 2015, they have started to rise and became very important and prioritized. The NDP goals and principles, targets, and all the chapters that we have are totally consistent with the SDGs and the Agenda 2063. And that could also have been that NDP was in 2012. And when we moved out of 2012, some of us also contributed and participated into the development of Agenda 2063 as a long-term plan for 50 years. That was done and adopted in 2013. 2 years after, we also contributed and participated in the implementation thoughts around beyond 2015 employment issues of SDGs that arose from what used to be called the MDGs. So for us, we do think that achievement of South Africa's domestic development priorities programs, the implementation of SDGs, the implementation of regional plans, as well as the Agenda 2063 should and continue to be supported through cooperation, deliberate working together, deliberate collaboration, deliberate compacts, and as well as deliberate partnerships, and with individual bilateral development partners in the country, deliberate working with all social partners, as well as ensuring that there is work with international development organization. So the critical issue of making sure that everybody is part of the dream, everybody is part of making sure that the development agendas are attained remains in the best way of understanding when we say leaving no one behind. It might not be best achieved immediately, but it should be punted, it should be worked upon. And by the time we get to the end of these times, we should be able to say, we think everybody is part of this story. The 2012 NDP is about our future in South Africa, and all of us should be able to make it happen. Everyone in South Africa is dreaming and aspiring that in South Africa by 2030, we shall have reduced poverty, we shall have reduced inequality, and therefore we will also have reduced unemployment. Our aspirations, our dreams by 2030. And when we look at the aspirations for Agenda 2063, we are talking about the Africa that we want, that is prosperous, based on inclusive growth as well as sustainable development. When we look at the goals and the targets of the SDGs, the aspirations, the dreams, the goals, and the targets in the SDGs, Vision 2030 is to end poverty, to provide, to protect the planet, as to ensure prosperity for all. And if we look at all these dreams and all these long-term plans, they are mutually reinforcing agendas that support sustainable development and long-term planning across the countries, across the globe, as well as across the continent. The next slide. When we look at the planning issues in the country, South Africa, at the heart of implementation for development, at the heart of planning for development in South Africa is the National Development Plan. And I must say, when we talk about planning in South Africa, there has been a lot that has been done to align. In the country, we have been deliberate that we use the 5-year plans that the country has always had, even before 2012. The MTSF work started in 2004. It was the first one that was 2004 to 2009. And when the NDP came into the picture, the country decided that don't duplicate, use the current known methodology and mechanism of medium-term planning in the country, which is the MTSF. Therefore, that's when we have the first MTSF that was meant to be the implementation framework of the NDP as the 14 to 19. And we are now in the second one, which is the 2019 to 2024, and the last one will be 24 to 29, leaving us with just a year to then evaluate by 2030. And in the provinces and in the district, as well as the municipalities, there are those plans that have always been there, even before the implementation, the launch, and the thinking of the long-term plan NDP. So all this have already found themselves laying the foundation to the content of the National Development Plan. In SADC, we have the RISP. We are working very, very closely with the Secretariat on Agenda 2063. We have reported already about twice to the AU in terms of the progress that we are making. And on SDGs, we have reported in 2019 in the voluntary reporting, and the next report is meant to be in 2024. Part of the mechanism that is going to strengthen how we report is the work that is done with the Statistics South Africa on the integrated indicator framework that should be able to capture all the developmental indicators that are captured on all the long-term plans, medium-term, as well as the short-term plans in our country. But of importance is the new coordinating mechanism at district level, which starts to take us to the thinking and understanding that development happens in districts. That is where the people are. And therefore, there is a development, the district development model that the country is working on. So as we move on, we will ensure that we report and make sure that we include the lessons of developmental agenda at district level as a coordinating mechanism for development measurement, but more specifically for implementation that allows and tries to dealing with challenges of planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating in silos. Next slide. When we look at the Agenda 2030, Vision 2030, the SDGs, the critical issues are about the economy. When we talk about the livelihood of the people, we will see it would be the goals 1, 7, 18, 11, 4, 3, 5, and 2. And all those critical issues are about nothing but the health, the livelihoods, the living conditions, as well as the living circumstances of the people on the planet. And you would see then the 4 goals that have really become very important and are starting to create a bigger understanding and force the understanding that environment is important. It's about the water, it's about the energy, it's about where we live, it's about the land. Thank you. The next slide. The aspirations that are there in the Agenda 2063 are aligned with all this information, and the one critical issue that is being pushed is to ensure inclusivity, that when development happens in our continent, no one should be left behind. The critical issue that should be put is about putting sustainable development at the heart of the work that is being done. But more importantly, it's about being able to ensure that transformation of economies is able to ensure that there is inclusivity in growth. And there is also the issue of making sure that we create environment for peace, for effectiveness, as well as open and accountable institution for the development agenda of all our member states in Africa. Forging a new partnership for development is at the heart of how development agenda in the countries, development agenda at the global level, as well as the continental level, can and should be attained. The critical issue in the next slide that we are talking about again is how we put all this together to try and avoid and run away from thinking that there is anything that the National Development Plan will achieve that is different from what needs to be achieved through the continental plans and through what we see in the global plans. In South Africa, our cycle of development is about creating the central points or the central wheels where there should be strong leadership in our country, there should be stronger active citizenry to which the whole of the sector government that is meant to implement is able to account. We should also to continue to thrive to build effective government to implement, to plan, and to be accountable, and being able to rally the whole of society behind the planning in the country. And those are the critical issues that we say when they are done, we should be able to see cohesion across the country. And those should be aligned to the issues that we have spoken about around the people, the planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership, as well as the aspirations that we have from Agenda 2063. The critical issues of development remain the same. The priorities remain the same. The apex issues that we are dealing with are the same. We are talking about reeling our countries, reeling our continents, and reeling the globe from poverty and inequality. And I hope as we move forward, this will start to show that the poverty that is being measured in the NDP is the same that is measured in the Agenda 2063 and is the same as the one that is measured in the SDGs. And therefore, the conclusion should be when we implement the National Development Plan, we are contributing to the implementation of Agenda 2063 and contributing to the country's implementation of the SDGs. Therefore, where we report about all these issues should be a central point so that we do not create a reporting fatigue for the rest of those that are also even charged with implementation across the country. Next one. So the critical work that we have done is to start to say, we understand that these issues are global, they are continental, but there is South Africa. And what we need to be able is to take the work from Agenda 2030 SDGs, from Agenda 2063 aspiration, and make sure that we domesticate everything and create a plan that is about South Africa. And we all say without action, there is just only a dream if there is no vision. And action without a vision just passes the time. Vision with action can change the world. If we are able to look ahead and dream ahead and say Vision 2030, and be able to be patient with self to say by 2030, this is where we want to be, and rally everybody towards the common goals, common objectives. Those are the social issues, the soft issues that if we get right, we shall start to see the results. So the domestication of the SDGs and the Agenda 2063 is what is taking us to better understanding the implementation, as well as the creation of the principles for implementing the National Development Plan as the action for the country to ensure that the agenda for development is carried through. And we have an understanding of who should do it, where we want to be, what is it that we want to do, by when do we want to know, why do we want to do it, and the questions and answers should be the dialogue and should be the conversation that the whole of South Africa, the whole of society, the whole of government becomes a manner in which developmental planning is done in our country. Next one. So what do we do? What should we do to achieve implementation of the NDP, Agenda 2063, and the SDGs? As these are the long-term plans, these are the long-term aspirations and dreams of all of us as nations, we require a concerted effort of all national stakeholders. Easier said than done. We do need to be able to get to a point where the NDP is the plan of the country and aligned to the continental and global plans. And that understanding should be created, and promotion of the implementation should be through multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder coordinating frameworks. This should be inclusive of government and non-government stakeholders, all social partners that were part of the adoption of the National Development Plan should be seen as all stakeholders that are also able to account for the implementation of the National Development Plan, which would be an accounting both for the continental and the global plans without duplicating the efforts. The coordinating mechanism that leverages on existing, we don't have to build and start new structures and institutions. We need to build on what exists. The current political and administrative coordinating structures within the country should be coerced and used as the mechanisms. They should be adapted slightly where possible and where necessary to ensure that as we develop plans in the country and report in the country through the NDP, such reporting again to the other bodies for the country should be put within the same coordinating mechanism. And in 2019, we took a national coordinating mechanism to cabinet on our way to the HLPF for the UN, when we were going to report for the first time on the progress that this country has made on implementing the SDGs. Next slide. So this is just an example of the mechanism that has been used over the past 2 years. As we are saying, all these things that we are talking about is building for development, creating a conducive environment for development agenda for this country, and for it to be a concerted effort to be reported upon. Cabinet as the lawmaker, cabinet as the leader that will go and report on our behalf to all these other platforms should be part of this integral type of mechanism. There is a Presidential Coordinating Council that includes all ministers, all mayors, all the president and the deputy president. And in that, we know that all the directors general would sit in there. And therefore, if the work had been done within the National Sustainable Development Stakeholders Forum, which should have everybody, all development agencies, all government agencies, all social partners, civil society, private sector, and business, should be able to be where all these critical issues are developed and created and reports are produced through working into what we call the working groups. We should have sectoral working groups, one for economy, one for social issues, one for governance and justice issues or whatever, and one for environment, depending on how we want to do it. And those should be the sectors that are used. And in the sectoral groups, we should not have government alone. In the sectoral groups, it should be all economists that can contribute to the matters economy in the country. All the partners that play a role in social transformation should be part of the sectoral working group on social transformation. And as we build these things, you will see it would be, by the time we go and report with government, we know that the voice of everybody is carried through the sectoral working group. As we learn, I always say in this work, it is our path, it is our journey. We will make it as we walk it. It might not be as we want it to be today, but I am sure in 3 years, in the medium term to long term, this is how we shall all be seeing our work in the country coming together. Next slide. So the mechanisms are really to provide an opportunity for the country to have a proper coordination, to enhance monitoring and evaluation, never to create a new structure for monitoring. Whatever the structures that are being used to monitor the implementation of the National Development Plan should be integrated in a manner that they should be the very ones that are used to monitor SDGs, as well as the very ones that are used to monitor implementation of Agenda 2063, as well as the SADC and all other regional plans. Everything should be in one pot, and we should be creating a greater awareness on SDGs in our country, greater awareness of Agenda 2063 across all of us, and making sure that even at local government, there is rich and understanding of all critical issues. Next slide. This is just the alignment exercises that we have done. I'll go very fast, but what the exercise that we did has indicated that between 2012 and 2030, when the thinking around development in the country and in the region, in the continent, looked at the creation of Agenda 2063 and the NDP, there was 94.8% in terms of the critical issues that are raised both in all this. When we move to the next slide, it also shows the alignment that has been there between Agenda 2063 and the NDP. So we do have convergence of about 90%, where the critical issues are about the people, social development, the economy, climate change, as well as making sure that there is peace across society and there is responsive institutions. Next slide. The lessons that we have seen since 1994 is that we have struggled over time with critical issues of inequality. We have been struggling with poverty issues, and the country has set out to close the inequality gaps within the social, economic, and governance structures. And there has been a quest to combat inequality that is backed up by the Constitution, the NDP, the MDGs, the SDGs, the Agenda 2063. So the long-term dreams at any point in time are about making sure that we would be able to deal with the major challenge of inequality. And the report in 2018 had also been able to indicate that as we did this work, we are at what one calls an incomplete transition. So we are still in transition. One says always, planning is not an event, it is a process. So as we work in this iterative process of planning, we are at a point where we shall continuously review. If we are now at a point where we say the transition is incomplete, what are the things that we need to do better? Even the critical issues of women are starting to be very important, and we also need to be able to always realize where progress has been made since 1994, but today we can also start to say some of the progress that we have been recording and have seen before is starting to be offset by matters, disasters, as well as issues of COVID. Next slide. The key principles to making us move better into the implementation of all the agendas. South Africa is committed to realizing the Agenda 2030, Vision 2030, NDP, as well as Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063, based on strong partnerships, collaborating between government, civil society, Chapter 9 institutions, trade unions, and private sector, as well as academia. And this should be deliberate, and this should be practical. And we should get to a point where there is coherence of Agenda 2030 that emphasizes the integrated nature of developmental goals, and we should start to move towards measuring impact. The 2030 agenda should be approached with a sense of urgency and starting to pick up impact where we start to see it, particularly on the livelihoods of the people, changes that we see with greater focus on the vulnerable groups and vulnerable individuals. Next one. I think the critical issue that we are saying is need to happen is that there is a need for different sectors and actors to work together in our country in a manner that is integrated, pooling financial resources. One of the success principles for implementation of all these developmental dreams is the ability to ensure that resources in terms of finance, knowledge, as well as expertise are pulled together to the best interest of the countries, the continent, and the nation at heart. And the Goal 17 encourages and promotes effective public, private, and civil society partnerships. And these are supposed to ensure that we are able to build on the experiences that exist, those that have been doing it, but moving forward to ensure that resource and strategies and partnerships are created to ensure that there is finance, there is resources for development in our countries. And there should be ongoing collaborative relationships across different stakeholders. The next one. I think we talked about the ability to ensure that there is a national policy development framework. One that was adopted by Cabinet in 2020 is what we are implementing currently. The next slide also talks to how we do this work. It is about making sure that there is just course of action. As we are in this last 10 years of implementation of both Agenda 2030 in the country and globally, it should be a call to action. There should be work that is done that is evidence-driven. Policy must be targeted. There should be effectiveness and functionality within the government institutions. Hence, we see that the critical issue that we are talking about in South Africa today is building a capable and ethical and developmental state that is able to ensure that development happens in the country, making sure that there are compacts and partnerships. The next slide is about also the critical issues that we talk to how we do it. It's about making sure that there is government, but of importance, there should be the public as part of doing this work. The next slide is also about making sure that we understand that developmental approach for long-term planning in South Africa is what the National Development Plan, Agenda 2063, the Vision 2030 for SDGs is about to achieve. We should continue to strengthen institutional collaboration. We should ensure that there is integration in implementation from NDP, Agenda 2063, as well as using the current thinking of planning coordination of DDM in the country to ensure that if we do well in implementing from the lowest level, that is how we will contribute to the highest level of SDGs. There is great need to make sure that we make headway against the challenges that the country faces, that requires invigorated implementation with the aid of enhancing stakeholder engagement, partnerships, and where necessary, building social compacts. All should be able to participate in a manner that we are able to create environment for development. And maybe the development approaches of bringing everybody on board and not making implementation and development agenda of our country about government alone should be promoted more. And we should also continue that we rally everybody, the whole of society, the whole of government together as the country to adhere to and implement the UN SEPA principles as have been presented to us today. And I think lastly, we should be able to ensure that when we implement in the country, the soft issues of inclusivity, the soft issues that say none of us can do it alone, it is the path that we are going to make as a country as we walk it, and be patient to accept and understand that building the country, building the state, dealing with poverty and inequality as well as unemployment are long-term projects that cannot only be achieved within short and medium term. Therefore, we should use medium and short-term plans to attain the long-term plans in our country, in our continent, as well as globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masiteng, for such a detailed presentation. There are some questions in the chat box. If you don't mind, we would just like to refer to you. Mataiwa Busika, apologies if I get your name wrong, wants to know, does the APRM governance monitor show that the democratic gains have deteriorated in recent years, or is democracy in Africa maturing? Is there a methodology for verifying national reports on the SDG implementation? And then a question from Bongani Maimela. The district development model is a good strategy to ensuring that the national plans are adapted to specific localities, to ensure that implementation is tuned to the local conditions. The challenge is not always implementation capacity, but where we actually do the implementation. So I'm just give you a second to catch your breath, Dr. Masiteng. 3 questions for you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're also running a Mentimeter survey, so please just check the chat box for the Mentimeter survey. Over to you, Dr. Masiteng.
Thank you very much. I think the APRM governance monitor and many other reports that are currently really into the review of how far we have come in terms of the implementation of the different aspirations for development in our country have, even the National Development Plan and NPC review that has been done has shown that some of the gains that we have also started to be reversed in the recent years. And I think what would be interesting is that one would say in answering this question, while democracy is maturing in Africa, and yes, in our countries, some of the challenges that are external and beyond the powers of the countries or the globe are starting to show that the interlinkages that we see on the economies, on the political economy, on the matters that are beyond the countries are starting to show that the issues of COVID-19 and the issues of the national as well as global disasters have been the contributors to the deterioration as well as the reversal of the good work that could have been done in countries and on the globe. The methodology for verifying the national reports on the SDGs implementation, when we wrote the VNR in 2019, we did had some sectoral verification reports and so on. And as we start now working towards 2024, we would like to improve and implement on the basis of the mechanism that I have presented on today, that says all of us should be part of that writing. And when the report about South Africa goes to the UN in 2024, everybody should feel that they have been part of writing that report, and all inputs should be received from all social partners that are part of development in the country. I think the issue around district development model is a comment that I do agree to, that there should be a critical effort that we understand implementation where the people are and the population dynamics, the catchment populations and their dynamics should be driving what becomes what we think are the best ways to turn the corner, to turn the livelihoods of the people in our country for the better, to fight unemployment, as to fight the issues of poverty and inequality in a manner that brings everybody to the fore and make sure that nobody is left behind. It is not a tick box, it is a developmental approach, whole of society, whole of government, and leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doc. I think we have got one last question from Bashir Raboji, who says, welcome all the presentation, especially on the coordinated planning. However, the enforcement tool, which is the Intergovernment Relations Act, doesn't really enforce coordination and integration vertically and horizontally. Maybe you want to just comment on that?
Thank you very much. I guess one of the things that we can agree with what is being said is that the IGR has been there since 2005, when we wanted to create the ability for the three spheres of government to work together on ensuring that there is integrated planning, but with the understanding of the interrelatedness and the independence of local government. And I think the lessons that he is being raised here around the challenges of that coordination of enforcement and maybe even issues of compliance are the lessons that need to start to be given and broadened to the issue of there has been this IGR issues of how government organizes itself. And now we are even talking about we need an effective, strong and leading government through the IGR structures, and now move even into a bigger pictures of saying it is not just about government alone. We should now have a government that is able to lead us going forward, when we now even say whole of society now needs that as we do this work, make sure that there is active citizenry, there is participatory governance, there is alignment of all the agencies that are in this country and are about development. Everybody is part of this, while government should also continue to strengthen internally these issues of IGR. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Principal Bosani Weni to just stand closer. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of our masterclass session, and I am sure you will appreciate not only the quality of the information and the presentation that we've engaged with Prof. Eddie Maloka, with Sarah Hamuda, and with Dr. Kafilwe Masiteng has really been thought-provoking. We are also running a Mentimeter survey in the chat box, so I would like to invite you to participate there. And then Ms. Hamuda is also running a questionnaire as part of the work of the APRM, and that's available in the chat box. We would love to see you in our next master classes, and I would like to ask Principal to make his closing remarks. Over to you, Principal. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you, Ms. Lepen, Program Director. Thank you to the colleagues who were generous to come and share their 2 hours with us this morning. Prof. Maloka, Ms. Hamuda, Dr. Masiteng, and everybody else who've been interacting since this session began. Please do go to the chat, do the survey, the Mentimeter, as well as the one that Sarah is doing. That's one way of ensuring that we keep the engagement going. We look forward to seeing you again soon when we run such master classes with experts from local and other international institutions, we hope that you are benefiting from these insights. Sarah in particular has shared her email address with you here on the chat platform. We're at liberty to continue to engage with her. If you have any question about the work of the APRM, be at liberty to drop an email. Also, if you need to contact Dr. Masiteng at the National Planning Commission, her contact details are available. It is just her name and surname at dpme.gov.za. You are at liberty to drop a line should you wish. So some of you here are students. I got a question, a text from someone. Those of you who are students who are studying the NDP, studying the Agenda 2063, or studying the SDGs, these are some of the people you can make contact with, and they will share some valuable lessons with you. Thank you once again for being with us today. The time is 12 o'clock on the dot. We will end the session here. Continue to learn, serve, and grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Prof. Busani for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.